Welcome to Readings in English, where you can learn English through incredible and easy-to-follow stories. How are you doing with your English studies? We know that learning a new language can be tough. There are many challenges along the way, from building vocabulary to mastering pronunciation and understanding the cultural nuances. But here you'll find that English becomes easier as we explore fun and educational stories together. Today, we have a special story about a young woman who has a deep passion for music. She decides to learn English through songs, starting by translating lyrics and learning about the culture behind the music. As she progresses, she begins to write her own songs in English, discovering a new way to express her emotions. Let's dive into her inspiring story and see how music helps her learn English. Clara sat on her bed, headphones snugly covering her ears, listening to the soft, melancholic melody of her favorite English song. The room was dimly lit, with only the warm glow of a bedside lamp illuminating her small, cluttered space. As the song played, Clara closed her eyes and hummed along, her voice faltering whenever the lyrics slipped into foreign words she didn't fully understand. Her face tightened with frustration. The music was beautiful, its rhythm intoxicating, but the meaning of the lyrics remained a mystery. She opened her eyes, stared at the ceiling, and sighed deeply. It wasn't the first time she felt this overwhelming sense of inadequacy. How could she claim to love these songs when she barely grasped their meaning? Clara shifted uncomfortably on her bed, glancing at the small notebook lying open next to her. Inside were scribbles, fragments of lyrics she had tried to translate, but the lines were disjointed, the meaning lost in her limited vocabulary. She thought back to when she first fell in love with English music. It was during a summer trip with her parents when she stumbled upon an old cassette tape in a second-hand shop. The shopkeeper had told her it was a classic, something every music lover should have in their collection. The cover was worn, the title faded, but when she played it for the first time, something stirred inside her. Even though she couldn't understand the words, the music spoke to her in a way she had never experienced before. Now, years later, that same cassette was tucked away in a drawer, a reminder of the moment she discovered her passion. But passion alone wasn't enough. Clara clenched her fists, determined not to let another day go by without truly understanding the words that had touched her heart so deeply. With a surge of determination, she reached over to her desk and grabbed her notebook and a pen. She wasn't going to give up. This time, she would learn. Not from a class, not from a textbook, but from the music itself. She pressed play again, this time with the lyrics pulled up on her phone. Line by line, she began writing the words down, carefully translating each one using the dictionary app on her phone. The process was slow. For every simple word, there were 10 others that baffled her. Phrases she couldn't make sense of, idioms that didn't translate neatly. Her head throbbed with the effort of piecing together a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. But Clara wasn't a quitter. She had always been stubborn like that. Each small victory, a word translated, a phrase understood, fueled her determination. Hours passed, the soft light of the lamp casting shadows on the pages as she scribbled furiously. Her handwriting became messy, her frustration peaking as the meaning of certain phrases continued to elude her. She stopped, rubbing her tired eyes. She hadn't realized how late it had gotten. Clara glanced at her phone. It was nearly midnight. The room felt heavy, as if the weight of her ambition was pressing down on her. She had barely made it through the first verse. Clara leaned back in her chair, feeling the familiar creep of doubt began to settle in her chest. Was she really capable of learning this? Could she ever break the barrier that separated her from the music she loved so dearly? For a moment, Clara considered giving up, the thought of surrendering to her limitations flickering briefly in her mind. But then she looked down at her notebook, at the messy scroll of words she had written. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was a start. Clara took a deep breath and allowed herself a small smile. She had completed the first verse. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. Tomorrow, she would tackle the chorus. The next morning, Clara sat at her desk again, sunlight streaming through the curtains, brightening the room. Her headphones were on, and the same song was playing softly in the background. This time, she wasn't just listening, she was analyzing. As she worked through the lyrics again, she noticed something she hadn't before: how the words flowed, how they connected to the melody in ways that weren't always about the literal meaning. Intrigued, she began researching more about the artist, the cultural background of the song, and the emotions behind it. Clara soon realized that music wasn't just about words. It was about context, about history, about the stories and emotions woven into each note. Her understanding of the song deepened, not just as a listener, but as a learner. Every lyric became a window into a world she hadn't known existed, a world where language and culture blended seamlessly with emotion. By the end of the week, Clara had translated the entire song. It wasn't perfect. Some phrases still didn't make complete sense, and her understanding of certain lines felt shaky at best. But as she read through the lyrics, there was a deep sense of satisfaction. For the first time, she felt like she was starting to understand, not just the words, but the feelings behind them. And that, she realized, was the whole point. Clara's newfound confidence pushed her to try something she had never imagined she could do: write her own song. One evening, with her notebook in hand, she began scribbling down her thoughts, trying to shape them into something that resembled lyrics. The words came slowly at first, awkward and stilted, but as the hours passed, they began to flow more freely. She wrote about her frustrations, about her love for music, about the barriers she was struggling to overcome. The song wasn't perfect, it was filled with grammatical errors and odd phrasings, but it was hers. As she stared at the finished page, Clara felt something shift inside her. She had found a new way to express herself, a way that transcended the limitations of her language skills. Learning English wasn't just about understanding music anymore. It was about finding her voice. Clara woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of determination. The frustration from the night before still lingered in the back of her mind, but the small victory of completing her first translation gave her the push she needed to continue. She grabbed her notebook and headphones, and after a quick breakfast, she settled into her usual spot at her desk. Today, she would push herself harder, going beyond just translating lyrics. She wanted to truly understand the music, to feel the words as if they were her own. With her favorite song playing softly in the background, Clara decided to create a routine for herself. She would spend each morning translating lyrics, and in the afternoons, she would try writing her own. It was a daunting task, but she knew that this commitment was the only way she would improve. Her notebook was now filled with messy translations and random notes, and while the progress felt slow, Clara couldn't deny that she was learning. Every new word she understood was a step closer to breaking the barrier that had kept her from fully experiencing the music she loved. But as she continued, a new challenge presented itself. Clara realized that her pronunciation was far from perfect. The words she had spent hours translating were still foreign to her tongue, and when she tried singing along, the sounds felt clumsy. Disappointed, she decided to record herself to hear what she sounded like. She pressed play, sang the first verse of her translated song, and then stopped to listen. The playback was painful. Her accent was thick, the words slurred, and it was clear that she was struggling to match the flow of the original song. Clara's heart sank as she listened. She knew that learning English was going to be difficult, but hearing herself like this made her feel like she was years away from ever singing confidently in the language. For a moment, Clara felt the weight of defeat pressing down on her. Her mind raced with doubts. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this. Maybe she would never be able to write or sing in English as fluently as she had dreamed. The disappointment gnawed at her, and she closed her notebook in frustration. But then Clara remembered the joy she had felt just days before when she completed her first translation. That feeling of pride, however small, was enough to remind her why she started this journey in the first place. She wasn't learning English to be perfect. She was learning because she wanted to connect with the music on a deeper level, and mistakes were a part of that process. Determined not to give up, Clara decided to approach the problem differently. She began studying her favorite singers more closely, mimicking their pronunciation and trying to match their tone. Every day, she would spend an hour listening carefully to how each word was sung, repeating it over and over until it felt more natural. It wasn't easy, but with each session, she could feel her confidence growing. Weeks passed, and Clara's routine became second nature. She continued translating songs, filling page after page of her notebook, and although the progress was slow, it was steady. Her pronunciation, though still imperfect, was improving. The words didn't feel as foreign in her mouth anymore, and when she sang along to her favorite songs, the melodies flowed more naturally. The self-doubt that had haunted her began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that she could do this. It was during one of these practice sessions that Clara decided to try writing another song. The idea had been lingering in her mind for days, but she hadn't felt ready until now. Sitting at her desk with a blank page in front of her, she let her thoughts flow. This time the words came easier. Clara wrote about her struggles with self-doubt, about her love for music, and about the fear of not being good enough. The lyrics were raw and honest, and as she read them back, she felt a deep connection to the words. This was her story, her emotions laid bare in a language she was still learning. As she finished writing, Clara stared at the page, feeling both proud and vulnerable. The song wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And for the first time, she felt like she was truly expressing herself in English, not just translating someone else's words. The process had been difficult, but it was worth it. Music had always been her way of connecting with the world, and now it was becoming her way of understanding herself. Clara didn't show the song to anyone, not yet. It was too personal, too new, but she knew that one day she would. For now, it was enough to know that she had written it, that she had created something entirely her own. A few days later, as she sat at her desk reviewing her notes, Clara felt a sense of peace. She had come so far since that first frustrating attempt at translating a song. There was still a long way to go, and there would be more challenges ahead, but she was ready for them. With each song she translated, and each lyric she wrote, Clara was discovering a new part of herself. Learning English had become more than just a goal. It had become a way for her to grow, to push beyond her comfort zone, and to find her voice in a world she had always admired from afar. The emotional growth Clara experienced during this time wasn't just about the language. Through music, she was learning how to process her emotions, how to confront the fears that had held her back for so long. Every note, every word, was a step toward understanding herself better. And while she still had doubts, Clara knew that as long as she kept pushing forward, she would reach her goal. With her new song tucked safely in her notebook, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. There would be more songs to translate, more challenges to face, and more doubts to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, Clara felt ready. She had built a foundation, and now it was time to continue building her melody. The music would guide her, and with it, she would continue to learn, grow, and discover the strength she had always had within her. As the day ended, Clara placed her notebook on the desk and looked out of her window, watching the sky change colors as the sun set. Tomorrow, she would return to her routine, translating lyrics, practicing her pronunciation, and maybe even writing another song. But tonight, she would rest, knowing that she had made progress. The path ahead was long, but Clara was ready to face it, one note at a time. Clara sat at her desk, staring at the blank page in front of her. It had been days since she last wrote a song, and every time she tried, nothing came out. Her mind felt like a tangled web of thoughts and emotions, but none of them seemed to translate into words. The pressure she had put on herself to be perfect was stifling her creativity, and she knew it. Yet the fear of failure kept her from writing anything at all. She had been listening to the same song on repeat, hoping that the familiar melody would spark something inside her, but it only served as a reminder of how far she still had to go. Her translations had improved, and her pronunciation was getting better, but when it came to writing her own lyrics, Clara felt like she was starting from scratch. She wanted everything to be perfect, to flow effortlessly like the songs she admired, but every line she wrote felt clumsy and forced. Frustrated, Clara tossed her pen onto the desk and leaned back in her chair. The weight of her own expectations was beginning to feel unbearable. She thought back to the first song she had written, how raw and honest it had been, even if it wasn't perfect. But now, every time she tried to write, she found herself comparing her work to that of native English speakers, and she always came up short. Clara sighed and closed her notebook. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this after all. Maybe she should just stick to translating other people's songs and leave the songwriting to the professionals. The thought made her chest tighten with disappointment, but the more she thought about it, the more she began to convince herself that it was true. She wasn't a songwriter. She was just a girl who loved music and wanted to understand it better. But even as she told herself this, something inside her resisted. She didn't want to give up, not yet. Clara had come too far to quit now. She had made a promise to herself when she started this journey, and she wasn't ready to break it. Taking a deep breath, Clara picked up her pen again. This time, she wouldn't worry about being perfect. She would just write whatever came to mind, no matter how messy or incomplete it felt. The first few lines were awkward, and she crossed them out almost immediately. But instead of getting frustrated, Clara pushed herself to keep going. She wrote about her struggles, about the frustration of not being able to express herself the way she wanted. She wrote about the pressure to be perfect and the fear of not being good enough. The more she wrote, the more the words began to flow, and soon the page was filled with lyrics. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Clara read over the lines, surprised by how much she had written. The lyrics weren't as polished as she wanted them to be, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of accomplishment. She had written something that came from her heart, and that was more important than perfection. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over her desk, Clara felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't a professional songwriter, but that didn't mean she couldn't write. Everyone had to start somewhere, and she was no different. Learning English had been difficult, but she had made progress. Writing songs would be the same. It would take time, and there would be setbacks, but as long as she didn't give up, she would get there. That night, Clara decided to record herself singing the new song she had written. Her pronunciation was still a bit rough, and she stumbled over a few words, but she didn't let it discourage her. She knew that with practice, she would improve. And more importantly, she was proud of the song she had written, imperfections and all. After recording, Clara listened to the playback. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. The lyrics felt raw and personal, capturing the emotions she had been bottling up for weeks. As she listened, Clara realized that perfection wasn't the goal, expression was. The song didn't need to be flawless to be meaningful, it just needed to be honest. In the days that followed, Clara continued to write, letting go of the pressure to create something perfect. She allowed herself to make mistakes, knowing that each one was a step toward improvement. Her notebook filled with half-finished songs and rough drafts, but each one represented progress. She wasn't just learning English anymore. She was learning how to express herself in a new language, and that was something to be proud of. One evening, while working on a new song, Clara had a breakthrough. The lyrics came to her easily, flowing from one line to the next without hesitation. For the first time, she felt like she was truly in control of the words, shaping them into something that reflected her emotions. The song wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was a reflection of her journey, of the ups and downs she had faced along the way. As Clara finished writing, she sat back and smiled. She had come a long way since that first frustrating attempt at translating a song. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time she felt like she was making real progress. She wasn't just translating other people's songs anymore. She was creating her own. That night, Clara decided to share one of her songs with a small online community of music lovers. She had been hesitant at first, afraid of what people might think of her English skills, but she knew that this was the next step in her journey. If she wanted to grow as a songwriter, she needed to be willing to share her work with others. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated the raw emotion in her lyrics, and some even shared their own stories of learning English through music. Clara felt a surge of validation, but along with it came a new fear. What if the praise was just because she was still learning? What if people were being kind because they knew she was a beginner? Clara wrestled with these doubts, but ultimately she knew that the only opinion that truly mattered was her own. She was proud of the progress she had made, and that was enough. She wasn't writing for anyone else. She was writing for herself. As she prepared to go to bed that night, Clara felt a sense of peace wash over her. She still had a long way to go, but she was finally starting to believe in herself. Learning English had taught her more than just a new language. It had taught her resilience, patience, and the importance of embracing imperfection. Clara knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of them. She had found her voice, and she was ready to use it, one song at a time. Clara sat nervously at her desk, her fingers trembling as they hovered over her laptop's keyboard. Today was the day she had decided to share her song with the world, or at least with a small community of music lovers she had found online. She had been preparing for this moment for days, yet now that it was here, a wave of doubt washed over her. What if they didn't like it? What if they thought her English was terrible? Claire shook her head, trying to push the negative thoughts away. She reminded herself that this wasn't about being perfect. It was about sharing something she had created, something that meant a lot to her. Taking a deep breath, Claire uploaded the recording of her song along with the lyrics she had written. Her heart raced as she clicked the submit button. There was no turning back now. She had done it. Now all she could do was wait for the responses. Her stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and fear, and she couldn't help but feel vulnerable. This song was a piece of her, a reflection of her journey, and sharing it felt like opening up a part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. Hours passed, and Clara tried to distract herself by working on her next song, but every few minutes she found herself checking her phone for notifications, her mind racing with possibilities. Finally, the first comment appeared. Her heart pounded as she opened the message, her eyes scanning the words. The person praised her for the emotion in the song, saying that they could feel the raw honesty in her lyrics. Clara's chest swelled with relief. Someone had connected with her song. It was exactly the validation she needed. As the hours went by, more comments trickled in. Some people shared their own stories of learning English through music, while others complimented her voice and the way she conveyed emotion. Clara felt a surge of pride, but with it came a flicker of fear. Were people just being kind? Did they really like her song? Or were they just encouraging her because they knew she was still learning English? The thought gnawed at her, casting a shadow over her excitement. Despite the positive feedback, Clara couldn't shake the feeling of doubt. She had always struggled with believing in herself, and now, even with people praising her work, she found it hard to accept. But then she remembered something one of the commenters had said: perfection isn't what makes a song beautiful. It's the emotion behind it. Clara realized that they were right. She hadn't written this song to be perfect. She had written it to express her feelings, and in doing so, she had already succeeded. With this newfound perspective, Clara decided to take things a step further. There was an open mic event happening at a small cafe near her apartment, and she had been considering performing one of her songs there for weeks. But the fear of messing up, of making a fool of herself in front of an audience, had always held her back. Now, after receiving encouragement from the online community, Clara felt a spark of courage. She wasn't ready to share her music with the world, but maybe she could start with a small group of people. The night of the open mic arrived, and Clara's nerves were in overdrive. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her outfit for what felt like the 100th time, her hands shaking slightly. She knew that performing live would be different from sharing her song online. There would be no screen to hide behind, no time to edit or redo. It would just be her guitar, and the audience. The thought terrified her, but at the same time, it excited her. This was the next step in her journey, and even though she was scared, she knew she had to do it. When Clara arrived at the cafe, she was greeted by the warm, cozy atmosphere of the small venue. The dim lighting and soft chatter of the audience calmed her nerves slightly, but as her turn to perform approached, the familiar sense of doubt began to creep in. What if she forgot the lyrics? What if she mispronounced the words? Clara shook her head, reminding herself once again that this wasn't about being perfect. It was about sharing her music, her story. Her name was called, and Clara felt her heart leap into her throat. With shaky hands, she made her way to the small stage, gripping her guitar tightly. The spotlight felt hot on her face as she adjusted the microphone, her mind racing with a million different thoughts. But as she strummed the first few chords of her song, something shifted inside her. The fear was still there, but so was the music. The familiar melody filled the room, and with it Clara's confidence grew. She began to sing, her voice soft at first, but gaining strength with each word. As the song progressed, Clara made a few mistakes. She stumbled over a line, mispronounced a word, and hit a wrong note on her guitar. But to her surprise, none of it seemed to matter. The audience was listening, really listening, and that was all she had ever wanted. The emotions behind the song took over, and by the time she reached the final verse, Clara was no longer thinking about perfection. She was just feeling the music, letting it guide her. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, and Clara's heart pounded in her chest. But then the room erupted in applause. The sound filled her ears, and for a moment, she couldn't believe what was happening. People were clapping, smiling, nodding in approval. Clara's cheeks flushed with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had done it. She had performed her song, mistakes and all, and the audience had responded with warmth and appreciation. As Clara stepped off the stage, a weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. She had faced her fear, and even though it hadn't been perfect, it had been real. That was what mattered. She had shared a piece of herself with the audience, and they had accepted it. Clara felt a surge of pride as she returned to her seat, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the performance. After the event ended, a fellow musician approached Clara, complimenting her on the performance. He introduced himself as Ethan, a singer-songwriter who often performed at open mics around the city. He mentioned that he had been impressed by her songwriting and asked if she would be interested in collaborating on a song. Clara was taken aback by the offer. Collaborating with another musician was something she had never considered before. Part of her felt excited at the prospect, but another part of her hesitated. Was she really ready for something like this? Ethan's enthusiasm was infectious, and Clara found herself agreeing to meet up and discuss the collaboration further. They exchanged contact information, and as Clara left the cafe that night, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and self-doubt. She had never worked with another musician before, and the idea of collaborating on a song in English felt daunting. But at the same time, it was an opportunity to grow, to push herself outside her comfort zone. As Clara walked home under the soft glow of the street lights, she realized that this was just the beginning. She had taken a leap of faith by performing at the open mic, and now new doors were opening. There would be more challenges ahead, but Clara was ready to face them. She had learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Growth, expression, and connection were what mattered most. And as long as she kept moving forward, she knew that she would continue to find her voice, one song at a time. Clara sat in the small cafe, her notebook open in front of her, filled with scribbled lyrics and half-formed melodies. She had been waiting for Ethan, the musician she had met at the open mic, to arrive. Today was the day they would start working on their collaboration, a project that both excited and terrified her. Clara had never collaborated with anyone before, and the idea of writing a song with someone else, especially in English, felt like stepping into unknown territory. But she also knew that this was a chance to grow, to push herself beyond her comfort zone. When Ethan arrived, he greeted her with a warm smile and sat down across from her. They spent a few minutes talking about music, about the artists they admired and the songs that had inspired them. It was clear that Ethan had a deep passion for music, and his enthusiasm was contagious. As they began discussing ideas for their song, Clara felt some of her nerves began to ease. Ethan was kind and patient, encouraging her to share her thoughts and ideas without judgment. They decided to write a bilingual song, blending English and Clara's native language. The concept excited Clara, as it felt like a perfect representation of her journey, combining the two languages that had shaped her love for music. They spent hours brainstorming, playing with different melodies and lyrics, trying to find a balance between the two languages that felt natural and seamless. At first, Clara struggled. Writing in English was still a challenge for her, and collaborating with Ethan only made her more aware of her limitations. She stumbled over words, unsure of whether certain phrases sounded right, and often found herself reaching for her dictionary to check translations. But Ethan was patient, offering gentle suggestions and reminding her that the song didn't need to be perfect. What mattered was that it felt honest and true to their experiences. As they worked through the song, Clara began to relax. She realized that collaborating with Ethan wasn't about proving herself or being perfect. It was about creating something together, something that blended their unique perspectives and voices. And as the song began to take shape, Clara felt a growing sense of pride. This was a song that reflected both of them, a mix of languages and emotions that told a story neither of them could have written alone. By the end of the day, they had written most of the song. It still needed some refining, but the foundation was there. Clara couldn't believe how much they had accomplished in such a short time. She had been so nervous about collaborating, but now, as she looked at the lyrics they had written, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was more than just a song. It was a testament to how far she had come in her journey of learning English and finding her voice through music. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Ethan continued working on the song, meeting regularly to fine-tune the lyrics and melody. Each session brought new challenges, but with each one, Clara felt herself growing more confident. She began to embrace her mistakes, understanding that they were a natural part of the creative process. Ethan's support and encouragement helped her see that perfection wasn't the goal, expression was, and as long as she was expressing herself honestly, the song would resonate with others. The day finally came when they finished the song. Clara sat in Ethan's small home studio, listening to the final playback of their recording. The song was beautiful, a seamless blend of English and her native language, with a melody that carried the emotions they had poured into it. Clara felt a surge of pride as she listened. This was something she had never thought she could do, right and record a song in English, let alone collaborate with another musician to create something so meaningful. As the last notes of the song faded, Clara realized how much she had changed since she first started learning English through music. She was no longer the girl who felt insecure and unsure of her abilities. She had found her voice, not just in her native language, but in English as well. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but Clara knew now that those moments didn't define her. What mattered was that she had kept going, pushing herself to grow and learn, even when it felt impossible. After the recording session, Ethan turned to Clara and asked if she wanted to perform the song at the next open mic. Clara hesitated. The thought of performing again, especially with a song she had co-written, was intimidating. But then she remembered how she had felt after her first performance, scared, but also proud. Performing this song, a song that represented her journey, would be another step forward. And Clara knew that if she wanted to keep growing, she couldn't let fear hold her back. With a deep breath, Clara agreed. They spent the next few days practicing together, refining their performance, and making sure they were both comfortable with the arrangement. Clara still made mistakes, occasionally stumbling over a word or missing a note, but each time, Ethan reminded her that it didn't have to be perfect. The audience wasn't expecting perfection. They were there to connect with the music, to feel the emotions behind the song. The night of the open mic arrived, and Clara stood backstage with Ethan, her heart racing with nerves. But this time the nerves felt different. There was still fear, but there was also excitement. She wasn't just performing a song she had written alone. She was performing a song that represented a part of her journey, a song that blended to languages and to voices into something beautiful. As they walked onto the stage, the familiar warmth of the spotlight settled over Clara. She glanced at Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod, and then turned to face the audience. The room was quiet, filled with anticipation. Clara took a deep breath, strummed the first chord on her guitar, and began to sing. The performance wasn't perfect. Clara made a few mistakes, but each one felt like a small hurdle she was overcoming. The audience listened intently, their faces reflecting the emotions of the song. As they reached the final verse, Clara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This song, this performance, was a culmination of everything she had worked for. It was a testament to her growth, not just as a musician, but as a person. When they finished, the room erupted in applause. Clara's heart swelled with pride as she looked out at the audience, their faces filled with appreciation. She had done it. She had performed a song in English, a song she had written with another musician, and the audience had connected with it. It was a moment she would never forget. As Clara and Ethan left the stage, a sense of peace settled over her. She knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. There would be more songs to write, more performances to give, and more challenges to face. But now Clara felt ready for whatever came next. She had found her voice, and she knew that as long as she stayed true to herself, she would continue to grow and evolve as both a musician and a person. That night, as Clara walked home, guitar slung over her shoulder, she couldn't help but smile. The journey had been long, and there were moments when she had wanted to give up, but she hadn't. She had pushed through the doubt and fear, and now she was standing on the other side, stronger and more confident than ever. Clara knew that music would always be a part of her life, and now so would English. The two had become intertwined in a way that felt natural and right. And as she looked up at the stars, Clara knew that this was only the beginning of her story.